Hey everybody, Yeso here, getting ready for this weekend as we're going to be kicking off the North American ALGS split number 2 this coming Saturday. I'm recording this late Thursday night, March 10th, and the entire goal of this video really is, if you theoretically went into a coma as soon as the regular season for split number 1 ended, you've missed a ton of action, and I would like to, for those theoretical individuals, kind of give you all the information you need to know that has happened between the end of the Split 1 regular season and today, so that you are ready for what is coming this weekend with split number 2. So I really want to hit on just briefly what happened in the split 1 playoffs, roster moves that have happened between splits here, some of the new faces you will see in the ALGS this split, and some that you will no longer see, my thoughts on the groups and my predictions there, as well as the schedule for the split. So really a ton to go through here, and we're going to run through it all. I'm going to have some just graphics on the screen. You'll see them over here that'll kind of help you see what I'm talking about throughout, but let's get right into it and talk about playoffs. Okay. Let's kick it off with playoffs. I'm going to bring up the top 10 standings for how things ended in the playoffs here for Split 1, and we'll run through it. Of course, the thing that jumps right off the top is the fact that, of course, TSM did win the Split 1 playoffs. There was a ton of discussion leading into playoffs from a lot of folks thinking that TSM was washed up. This wasn't, maybe the Verhulst move was a bust, and they were really not going to be able to do anything now that Snipedown had left, and maybe that was the reason that they were falling off. And certainly TSM, between the end of the regular season and the start of playoffs, had a bit of a rough go. They didn't quite get that early honeymoon phase that you see with some rosters where, a new player or two comes in and you have a lot of good early results to really kick things off from the start. They definitely had some struggles adjusting, implementing Verhulst into the roster. And I personally was certainly someone who was kind of low on TSM going into the playoffs. But let's be clear. Anybody who thought this team was washed was crazy. And I know hindsight is 2020, but even before, I think you were insane if you thought that. I was down on TSM, but I still had them finishing top 10 in playoffs. I just didn't think they were going to be that big of a threat to finish first place. I had them between kind of 5th and 8th, and I had Team Esports Arena in the same range because I think they had dealt with some of the same issues. I think they had not incorporated Noct as well in the time between the end of the split, in terms of regular season and the start of playoffs. But, of course, as you can see on your screen, both teams performed very, very well. To note, TSM, of course, won with 93 points. They hit match point with their win in game number 4, and then had a bit of a drop-off, honestly. They had 2 rougher games. They finished 9th in game 5, 16th in game 6. Which things were not looking great. But then TSM came out and they absolutely fried in the last game. We went into game 7. They had 16 kills and a win to, of course, capture the match point victory and win it all. So they finished on an absolute huge high. I mean, that's a 28-point game from them. So they finished on the highest of high notes there for sure. Of course, the team won $100,000 for finishing in first place, so congrats to them. But, of course, we can also run through kind of the rest of the top 10 here. NRG, they had a good showing. They won the first game of the day. Weren't able to kind of recapture that in terms of placement afterwards, but still solid showing. They finished at 62 points. They grabbed second place. Team Esports Arena had a really solid, pretty consistent day. They were the second team to hit match point. They hit it with their performance in game 5 after TSM. A squad that actually never won a game on the day, but just had some really solid early performances that got them to match point, and sadly weren't able to finish out the day to grab the win, but they still showed up well. Sentinels a point behind them at 59 points. They looked really good. And I will skip past the other two to talk about Premier GG, because that was the final team that did hit match point before game number 7. And Premier was one of the big surprises, honestly, of the tournament. They had a really, really solid day, and they were definitely a team that I think most folks didn't really have pegged anywhere kind of near the top five, but they really showed up well, and had, honestly, a really good day and have a lot of things to build on from this performance going into the split, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Then, of course, you have Torrent and C9. Torrent was another one of those surprises. They had just brought in Rambo to the roster. That roster has gelled very, very quickly. Torrent looked really good. C9 had a solid day. Both of those teams, as you notice, they're not in yellow. That means they crossed the match point threshold, which is 50 points in the final game. So they were technically never on match point, never had the opportunity to win it all. Rounding out the top 10, G2, RNG, W. G2, not as good of a day as I was certainly expecting. I had them inside of my top 3 going into the tournament. They didn't have a bad day by any stretch, but 45 points, not getting to match point, I would say not what they were expecting. RNG, solid performance for the team. Of course, some changes have happened after this, and they seemingly were not necessarily entirely satisfied with the performance that they had in the playoffs, and we'll have to see what these changes can do for them. And then, of course, rounding out that top 10 is W. And if you do watch Series E, that is, of course, the Team Vizio roster that has been crushing Series E so far this season. 10th place, they were top 10 in the regular season. And I would say, of course, they probably felt really confident going into the tournament that maybe they could threaten for a top 3 spot and maybe even for a win. I think this is one they should be happy with. This is a team that has quite a bit of experience. Of course, both Fury and Fody competed in the ALGS championships back in June, and that's a good thing to have under their belt. I would say they still have some things to work on to truly threaten the top of the table, but at the very least, I would say for the first major tournament for this iteration of the roster with Scissors, not only finishing top 10 during the regular season, but then getting into top 10 in playoffs and getting 41 points and being right up there in the mix with RNG, G2, Premier, and more. I think that's a respectable showing, so credit to W. Premier, GG was, of course, my biggest surprise there with 54 points. Biggest disappointment, 100 Thieves. If you guys missed this, 100 Thieves had a terrible day. They had a terrible day. They finished with 11 points overall in the tournament, and it really just wasn't there for them. They have, as a result, made changes. I know that the players, and this is the roster, right? Onmu, Scurry, and Vayne that won champs back in June when they were playing with KNG, and it was the big surprise kind of Cinderella story for this team. And I think a lot of folks had high expectations for this team after that they were going to hopefully be able to kind of maintain that championship form, and whether it's like the championship hangover or maybe that was more of a flash in the pan and not really what to expect from this roster, you can kind of make of it what you will, but they did not show up at all in this tournament. Finished in last place as a result. 11 points is, in my opinion, it's unacceptable for a roster and an organization of a caliber like 100 Thieves. So, of course, they have made some changes that we'll talk about a little later, but that kind of rounds out my general thoughts on playoffs. So, of course, TSM with the win. You can see right there, TSM Energy, Esports Arena Sentinels, Torrent round out the top 5, and Premier with my biggest surprise of the event. Now I want to talk a little bit about some roster changes that have happened between the end of the last split and now. And we'll start off at the top with one of the teams I literally just talked about, 100 Thieves. They have dropped Vayne. Vayne has parted ways with the team. And they have brought in Vaxlon, who previously has been competing on Renegades. Interesting enough, they're in the top 10. Also played on CLG prior to that. I really like this move. I really, really like this move. So, for context, just last night, 100 Thieves actually won Pro Night in Series E. Looked really good doing it. Won 2 games. Pretty strong performance front to back. And they're looking good early on. It's still early with the roster. They have not been playing together all that long. I think they've only been together with this iteration with Vaxlon for, I think, 3 weeks. So it's still early, and they still could kind of be in that honeymoon phase. So we'll see how it continues into the season for the ALGS. But at the very least, Vaxlon coming in for Vayne has looked good early on. We'll have to see if it continues for 100 Thieves. Of course, we'll have to talk more about how that shakes out in the context of their group, and we will hit on that there as I'll take off the playoff standings here. Next up is Renegades. Of course, we just mentioned Vaxlon leaving the team. Well, who did they replace him with? I'm Madness. Previously played with Ghost Gaming for a little while. Also was on the Benchwarmers roster in Split 1 that broke up, as well as CLG before that. This is another roster that I had a lot of excitement when the Renegades, like the original Renegades roster, got signed back in mid-2021. And I really feel like they never delivered on that potential. Of course, they ended up bringing in Vaxlon. That roster was okay. Really kind of feels like it peaked in the ALGS playoffs. Of course, they finished in 9th place there. I don't think it was going any further than that, and they decided to make a change, bringing in Madness. Another team that I think the early returns are good. We'll have to see. 100 Thieves and Renegades, I like both of the moves that they've made. Does it pan out in the long term? We'll still have to see. It's still a little too early for both of those for me to have thoughts, but I think, of course, the ALGS will give a lot of answers to these questions. Furia. Okay. Let's talk about Furia. So, Furia is an interesting team because if you look at them in the first split, right, when they signed this roster, it's Tech, Mr. Hakulo, Zera Tricky. Zera and Hack I like a lot. I've watched them play a lot, of course, because of my experience in Series E. And especially the combination of Zera and Hack together have been really good for a really long time. It would seem like they have decided that, as we talked about with Renegades, that duo has kind of peaked and there was nowhere further to go. So then ultimately Furia decided to part ways with Mr. Hakulo. Tech and Zera Tricky are still there. They have brought in to replace Hakulo, though, Panders. Panders, of course, was previously competing with Ghost, was part of the Season 2 Team Intel roster that got signed by Ghost at the end of Season 2. And this is a big pickup for Furia. Panders, I think, is a really, really, really good player. And I think if you're dropping a Mr. Hakulo, Panders is the kind of player you want to bring in to fill that role for him. Can be that big leading fragger, can be that kind of main carry for the team. Does it pan out? I'm going to be honest, I have not been the biggest fan of Tech, and not, this is like his kind of general trolling and personality aside. I think that's whatever. Just in terms of watching him play, I'm not kind of the highest on him as a player. But if Panders can settle in with this roster, I think the ceiling is high. I just think the floor is kind of just as low as the old Furia roster, and we'll have to see how things shake out. We'll just have to see. I don't know. I really want to see this roster succeed because I like Panders. I like Zera. I would love to see Tech prove me wrong and have a really solid split. And I don't think there's any way that this team succeeds just by virtue of like Zera and Panders carrying them. I think if they are successful, Tech plays a big role in that, and I would love nothing more than for because I feel like this would happen, like for this to be clipped out and Tech is tweeting at me like, "Oh, you were down on me," and we just popped off. We finished second in our group or whatever. That'd be great. That'd be great. I would love to see this Furia roster succeed. I think Panders is a fantastic addition. We'll just have to see how it pans out. Perfectly, we're kind of rolling, talk about a player, talk about his old team then. Let's talk about Panders' former team, Ghost. We already talked about one of his other teammates, Madness, joining Renegades. So Panders and Madness are out. Their replacements, Impulse and Rakanishu. Impulse and Rakanishu previously competed on Noble. Of course, Impulse competed with former Lucas and Stomps on the Season 2 Pop-Tarts roster. At the end of that season, they dropped Stomps and replaced him with Rakanishu and then signed with Noble. If you want more information on the situation that happened with Noble, because of course they won't be returning to the ALGS, I will refer you to my interview with Rakanishu. It is linked at the end of the video. We talk a little bit about that whole situation. Really not going to get into it here. It really isn't relevant. But if you want more information, check out that interview. But the Noble roster is no more. Impulse and Rakanishu are now joining in with Ghost. They will be playing with 6, of course, staying on the team. And this is one that I want this to work. I really like Rakanishu. Of course, we had a great 40-minute conversation in the interview here on this channel. He's an awesome guy, and I want to see him succeed. I know he's like a kind of a fan favorite of a lot of us at the Esports Arena office, especially because of like our experience with him over a couple of seasons of Series E. I want to see this roster succeed, and I think 6 is a really awesome in-game leader. And I think Rakanishu is a pretty good player. Impulse is somebody that I have not been super high on since watching him in Season 2. Ultimately, I'd say I'm pretty mid on this roster. I think they have good pieces. I'm just not buying that it will come together, but it's another instance where I would love to be proven wrong, but we will have to see. That's the Ghost roster there. The final one that I do want to touch on here is Team Liquid. Team Liquid flanker is out. They have brought in Gildersons, who previously played for PK, Pittsburgh Knights, in the last split. So one thing I want to note is there has not been official word about flanker getting dropped. I double checked his Twitter today to see if maybe he said he was stepping away, taking a break from competitive. If you look on Liquipedia, he's still listed on the roster. So I'm not sure if this is flanker taking some time off because they've brought in Gildersons here, or if Gildersons is the permanent replacement here. I'm not entirely sure what the situation is, but at the very least, this roster has been competing as of late with the roster of Fun, Nocturnal, and Gildersons. Liquid I'm pretty mid on as well, if I'm being honest. I think Fun is pretty sick. I like Nocturnal a lot, and I like Gildersons as well. I just don't know if bringing in Gildersons raises the ceiling for this roster any higher. I think they're a top 10 team in Pro League. I just don't really see this being the thing that busts them into the top 5, because it feels kind of like the top 5 is pretty set right now, and in my opinion this roster change does not really make me reconsider that. So we'll have to see. Team Liquid, of course, is a pretty consistent roster, and their highs can be pretty high, but I'm not necessarily buying very high on Liquid going into this split, so we'll see. Next thing I want to hit on is some team stuff, of course. With the nature of relegations and stuff, roster moves, all those kinds of good things. I do want to just kind of note, and this will be a quick section, just to talk about some of the teams that you will not see this split, as well as some new blood that I'm excited to see in the Pro League due to qualifiers. So, I already mentioned them, but Pittsburgh Knights are no more. At least their Apex roster has disbanded. We were just talking about Gildersons going to Team Liquid. And Ashura, I believe, is playing on Atlanta Premier now, so PK is just not in Pro League this split. They don't have a roster. Absolute Monarchy have made one roster change and have, of course, left Absolute Monarchy. They're now with Dexterity. Area Eternity is no more. Premier GG is now rebranded as Atlanta Premier, with one roster change there. Noble is no more. Again, I will refer you to my interview with Rakanishu if you want kind of more information on what happened there. Go check that out, but no more Noble. Also do want to note the two Mexican teams that were competing in the last split are just under new names now. Legacy MX is now All Glory Gaming, and Estral Esports is now Scry, or SCRY. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's just Scry. And then some new blood that you will be seeing, RCO Esports, Start a Fight Esports, and LMK. RCO is a team that we see very frequently in Series E Open Night. They're not really a team that kind of threatens for the top of the standings, so I'm not really too high on that roster. I don't think they're going to do anything too crazy, but at the very least, I like them getting their chance. Start a Fight Esports. This is the crummy Aves Matt Pickett roster. Of course, that's a very, these are like Series E OGs, players with a ton of history in the scene. They've had some good showings since they came together. We'll have to see how it pans out in Pro League when the competition is raised. And then, of course, LMK is the Team Nerf roster with Turns, Dimmy, and Force. And would love to see them exceed. Really like that team. I don't know that they're going to light the world on fire, but we will have to see. Now, let's talk about the groups. And this is where things get really fun. So I do want to note what I'm going to do for each of these groups. I will bring up the group on the screen. They'll be right over here. So I'll bring the group up on the screen so you can see group by group. I will pick for each group my top 2 teams and kind of why, as well as a dark horse. And I want to be clear that the dark horse picks are teams that I do not have necessarily listed in my top 3 to 4, but a team that I think has a high ceiling that can threaten for a top 2 placing. I'm not necessarily betting on them to do so, but I think if things go right, that this is a team that could surprise in this group. Okay, so let's start with Group A. Bring this one up. So Group A, of course, is going to be TSM, your Split 1 playoff champions, G2, Renegades, Lazarus, XSET, Buff Pathfinder, CLX, Nightmare, Washed, and Bad Boys. And to note, Bad Boys is a new roster that includes, or a roster that has been adjusted. They have Farmer Lucas, formerly Noble, just for note there. So this was pretty easy on the top 2 standpoint. I'll just take the 2 at the top on the list, TSM and G2. Doesn't really require any explanation here. Of course, TSM coming off of their playoff victory, that's an easy pick. G2 is a team that I have kind of always had pretty high stock in, even when they maybe have some rougher results. This is a team I have a lot of faith in. And while I think Renegades is better than they were last split, I still think G2 is the better team and they likely finish ahead. So I'm taking TSM, G2 as my top 2. My dark horse here is Lazarus. Ultimately, and I'm not going to necessarily do this for all of them, but for this one I will. I would say my top 4 is TSM, G2, Renegades, XSET. Lazarus is I would say 5th or 6th. They've just brought in GS Bird. I like that addition, and I think the roster that I think finished the Split 1 fairly strong in the regular season, they did okay in playoffs, but it seems like the GS Bird edition has kind of built on that foundation nicely, and they've been looking better and better over the last few weeks. I'm not necessarily on the Lazarus hype train, but I would say they are my dark horse to do something interesting in Group A. So TSM, G2, top 2, Lazarus, my dark horse. Let's talk about Group B. Well, let's do this. There we go. Okay, Group B. Group B is NRG, Premier GG, W, Ghost Gaming, Oxygen, Charlotte Phoenix, Scry, CLG, RCO Esports, and LMK. This is a very interesting group. I'm picking this as the group of life, and I know people sometimes have different definitions of these terms, so I will specify. This is the group of life for me because I feel like outside of NRG, this group is wide fucking open. I think that almost any team in this group could finish second place behind NRG. It's crazy. And it's not like they're all bad. Like, I think there's a ton of talent in this group. I just think it's kind of difficult to say this team is clearly above the rest. So, in that vein, my top two here is NRG and CLG. I'm taking the faith. I am taking the hopium. I'm going back to my old classic CLG League of Legends fandom days. I'm taking CLG here. Ultimately, if I had to pick if I kind of had to tier list this group, NRG is in the S tier. I think my A tier is Ghost Gaming, W, Premier GG, CLG. Below them, B tier would be Oxygen, Charlotte Phoenix, Scry, and then below them would be RCO, LMK. At the same time, I think LMK could easily, and I don't know, I use the term easily loosely. I think LMK could get into the top 5. I don't think that is like a crazy prediction, but this is just a super weird group. I have really liked, though, what I have seen from CLG over the last few weeks. I think they are improving at a pretty good pace, and I think that over the course of a split, they could do some serious damage here. Ultimately, it's going to be a tough group, and this may be this is probably the one that I'm like most likely to have egg on my face here, because we could get to the end of the split and everybody could be like, dude, CLG was trash. They were dog shit. Why did you pick them as second place? Who knows? But NRG and CLG are my top two. My dark horse here is W. Now, some of you might think that's crazy. Vizio's been really good this season. You really like that team. Those are two correct statements. Ultimately, and I'll do it again here to explain my pick. If I'm ranking my top 4, I think it's NRG, CLG, Premier, Ghost. I think it's my top 4. And then I think I'm just picking my 4th place team here, or my 5th place team here again. It's W. And it's really just because I think the ceiling is super high here. Fury, Phony, and Scissors have been a great combination. Scissors has been the top fragger for the team this season in Series E. He's been super, super good. He and Phony alongside each other have been incredible. How is it going to look this season? I think it's going to look really good. And I'm like, I feel like I'm picking a dark horse team that I'm like, I feel like Lazarus, I would be surprised to an extent if they finish top 2. My other dark horse picks for Group C and D are good, and I think they can do great things, but I would still be kind of surprised if they finish top 2. W is a team that I wouldn't necessarily be surprised by. So maybe I'm breaking the rule or the definition of my dark horse. I don't care. It's my video. Fuck it. But W is my dark horse. So NRG and CLG, top 2. W is my dark horse. Group C. Okay. This is a top-heavy group. I think this is the most top-heavy group. I think followed up possibly by Group D. This group has Esports Arena, Cloud9, Team Liquid, Furia, 100 Thieves, Built by Gamers, Senior Service, Last Minute, Optimal Ambition, and Literally Vibing. Top 2 in this one, and this should come as not really a big surprise, Team Esports Arena and Cloud9. I think Team Esports Arena is, very clear in that top 5 best teams in North America. Pretty easy pick there. Cloud9 is a team that I feel like can fluctuate fairly wildly, high highs, low lows, but they looked really good in playoffs. They've looked pretty darn good as of late and have been pretty consistent, which is a good sign for me, right? I feel like going into the first split, I wasn't sure exactly what their level was going to be going in. This time I feel like Cloud9 is on a pretty good point. Also, you can add in the fact that, I talked about it in my roster moves. I'm not as high on Furia or Liquid. 100 Thieves can do some damage, but ultimately, felt pretty easy here picking Esports Arena and Cloud9 for my top 2. My dark horse, though, this is where things get fun. My dark horse is Senior Service. Now, if you don't know who that roster is, I don't blame you, but this is the current Team Intel roster from Series E. That is Mooney, Fearless, SlurpEG, and they've just recently brought in SlurpEG. Okay. First of all, this team is killing it right now in Series E. They've looked really, really good. They just had a record-setting performance this past Tuesday night. And I think the addition of SlurpEG is kind of what pushes this team to the next level. I talked about it in the other night on the show that I think Fearless is possibly one of my favorites for MVP of Series E this season because he has been absolutely incredible and I think the biggest catalyst to the rise of Team Intel over the last month. But I think SlurpEG added into this roster makes this team absolutely insane. And I think despite the fact that I think this is the most top-heavy group, I think Senior Citizen has almost, I would say, almost as good a chance as W to break into that top 2. It's going to be super tough. But I think this team is really good, and this would be like my kind of like fingers crossed hope for a team to really make a splash this split. So top 2, Esports Arena and Cloud9, and then Senior Service, my dark horse here for Group C. Let's talk about the final group here, and it's Group D. Group D's boys. This group includes Sentinels, Torrent, Complexity, Space Station, Unlucky, Dexterity, All Glory Gaming, Elevate, Start a Fight, and TDG. So, this group, Sentinels, pretty easy first place pick. I think they're the clear best team in this group. My second place, though, is going to be Complexity. I kind of went back and forth between Complexity and Torrent here. I think Torrent looked really good in playoffs, and I really like Rambo, and I think Rambo slots well into that roster. I'm just betting that Complexity's highs will be higher this split, and that pushes them kind of above Torrent, but I think it's very, very close there. In terms of my dark horse here, it's actually Dexterity. I really liked Absolute Monarchy last season. I think they struggled to get going a little bit, but I think the roster has a lot of talent on it. I like the changes that they've made coming into this split. And, I think they're putting in the work, and I would love to see them do something here. This is probably the one that is, most likely to not turn out. If I was ranking, my dark horse picks on, most likely to do the dark horse thing, it's probably W at the top, Senior Service right behind them, and then a bit of a jump for Lazarus, and then Dexterity at the bottom. But I'm just kind of on some hopium here. I like this Dexterity roster, and I want them to make some noise here because I think it would be really, really interesting if all of a sudden they're up there going back and forth with Torrent, Complexity, Space Station competing for that second place spot. So ultimately, Group D, Sentinels and Complexity are my top 2. Dexterity are my dark horse, and that will do it for my thoughts on the groups. Kind of as we wrap up here, just a few notes. Do want to remind folks that, of course, big change for this split in the ALGS Pro League. There is now another map in the rotation. If you missed the announcement, Storm Point is now in the competitive map pool. So they will be doing split games. 3 games on World's Edge, 3 games on Storm Point. We've been doing it in Series E for a little while. It's been a nice little wrinkle. I'm still not 100% kind of figured out on how it's going to affect kind of competitive play. I really feel like a week or 2 in ALGS will kind of give us the most definitive answers on what it does in terms of the level of teams, who has adapted to the map well, how is it going to play. So we'll see how that goes. Apologies for me bumping my mic there, but we'll have to see. But that is one important thing to note here for this season. And then, of course, and I will pull up the schedule here, one thing to note too is that due to the season being delayed. EMEA 1 will not be starting it. They are still postponed due to, obviously, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. But North America and the rest of the regions are starting up, and I do want to hit on that schedule. Right now, I'm going to bring this one up full screen for everybody so you can see it. So you won't see my face, but you'll see the schedule, and we can talk through it. So here is the schedule for Split 2. Of course, kicks off this weekend, March 12th and 13th. And then we get some very, very busy weekends. March 17th and 18th are when the next two match days are. For reference, that is a Thursday and Friday. And then match days 5 and 6 are the next 2 days. So we have this weekend, and then 4 days in a row of ALGS next week, Thursday through Sunday. And then for the last 5 match days, or the last, 5 match days. Unless they did the graphic wrong, but, and then we play match days 7 through 12 between March 24th and 28th. So that is a lot of Apex in a very short amount of time. Of course, make sure to block out your time, set it aside. Go watch the ALGS. I think this split is going to be insane. I'm going to take this down for y'all so you can see me. Hello, hello. You're not going to want to miss this split. I think when you look at the crop of teams, of course, a lot of the storylines that have been set up by roster changes, team adjustments, playoffs, this one's going to be incredible. And my real hope is that, of course, we get out of this split what we didn't get last split, right? The hope was to have an international playoff with the top 10 teams from North America going to compete with some of the best from around the world. Of course, due to COVID, that did not happen, but it would seem with a lot of things going on right now that maybe we are finally coming to a point where there is an international Apex competitive event on the horizon, and it could come as soon as the end of Split 2 here. I am hoping so much. I think it is an incredible time for Apex Legends Esports, and I cannot wait. To everybody watching, thank you so much. If you guys have any questions for me, if you want to pick my brain, hear my thoughts on anything, throw them down in the comments. Make sure to let me know what you think as well. Who are your picks from these groups? What's your favorite roster move? What are your thoughts going into this split? Let me know, and feel free to hit me up with any questions on Twitter as well. It'll be linked down in the description. But thank you so much for watching, everybody. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking it and subscribe for more esports content like this. If you want to keep tabs on everything that I'm working on, follow me on my socials. They're linked down in the description. And if you want to watch my latest video, it's linked on your screen right now. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.